Somewhere in your late 30s, you started counting backwards. You probably didn't notice when it happened. One year, you were still thinking about what you'd become, and then, almost overnight, you were thinking about what you'd already missed. That quiet arithmetic, the slow pivot from time spent to time left, feels like a modern disease, a product of cubicles and car payments and the dull terror of an unchecked bucket list. We assume the midlife crisis was invented in the 20th century by people with enough comfort to be bored by their own success. But there's a problem with that assumption. In 2012, a team of researchers proved that chimpanzees and orangutans, animals with no mortgages, no divorces, no concept of a career, go through the exact same thing. Which means the dread you feel at 40 may not come from your life, it may come from your body. And if that's true, then the real question isn't whether ancient humans had midlife crises. It's why your species evolved to be miserable at the exact moment it became most powerful. The term midlife crisis was coined in 1965 by a Canadian psychoanalyst named Elliot Jacques. He published a paper in the International Journal of Psychoanalysis called Death and the Midlife Crisis, and his argument was specific. Around age 35, creative geniuses either burned out, reinvented themselves, or died. He studied 310 painters, composers, and writers, from Dante to Beethoven, and found the same pattern: a rupture, a before and after. Jacques believed the trigger was mortality, that somewhere in your mid-30s, your own death stopped being an abstraction and became a schedule, a personal appointment you could almost see on the horizon. His idea caught fire. Within a decade, the midlife crisis had gone from an academic concept to a cultural cliché, complete with red convertibles and regrettable haircuts. The explanation seemed obvious. Modern life creates modern anxieties, and the midlife crisis is what happens when your expectations outrun your reality. But that neat story started unraveling the moment scientists looked beyond humans. Alexander Weiss, a primate psychologist at the University of Edinburgh, spent years studying personality in great apes. In 2012, he and his colleagues, including economist Andrew Oswald, published a study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences that changed the conversation entirely. They surveyed the caretakers of 508 great apes, 336 chimpanzees, and 172 orangutans across zoos in 5 countries. The caretakers rated each animal's well-being, its mood, its sociability, how successfully it pursued goals. When Weiss plotted the data by age, the graph drew a shape that any economist would recognize: a U. Happiness started high in youth, dropped steadily through the ape equivalent of middle age, the late 20s and early 30s for chimps, and then climbed again in old age. The same curve that shows up in human happiness data from over 130 countries showed up in animals that have never worried about a promotion or a mortgage payment. As Oswald put it, we ended up showing that the midlife low cannot be because of mortgages, marital breakup, mobile phones, or any of the other paraphernalia of modern life. That finding pointed somewhere uncomfortable. If the dip isn't cultural, maybe it's biological. And if it's biological, it would have been present in every human who ever lived, including the ones sleeping under open skies on the African savanna 100,000 years ago. But to ask whether ancient humans had midlife crises, you first have to establish that they lived long enough to have one. And this is where most people get the story wrong. You've probably heard that ancient humans only lived to 30. That number, the average life expectancy at birth for hunter-gatherers, is real, but it's a statistical ghost. It is dragged down mercilessly by infant mortality. Michael Gervin and Hillard Kaplan, anthropologists at UC Santa Barbara and the University of New Mexico, published the most comprehensive analysis of hunter-gatherer mortality ever assembled in the Population and Development Review in 2007. They examined data from the Hadza of Tanzania, the Ake of Paraguay, the Kung of the Kalahari, and more than a dozen other groups. Their conclusion was clear. A hunter-gatherer who survived to age 15 had about a 64% chance of reaching 45, and anyone who made it to 45 could expect roughly 20 more years of life. The modal adult age of death, the age at which the most adults actually died, was around 68 to 72. These were not people who dropped dead before they could experience a midlife anything. So picture a 40-year-old Hadza man, roughly 100,000 years ago. He has survived childhood disease, predators, famine, and intergroup violence. He is, by the brutal arithmetic of his world, a winner. His body is still strong. He is among the most skilled hunters in his band. He knows where the tubers grow in dry season and which waterholes hold through August. He carries decades of knowledge that younger men don't yet possess. And yet, if the U-curve is biological, something in his neurochemistry is bottoming out. He is experiencing the lowest well-being of his entire life. Not because anything external has gone wrong, because something internal is running on a clock he cannot see. But why would evolution build a trough of misery into the peak of competence? Weiss himself speculated on this. He suggested the dip might actually be functional, a motivational signal. At midlife, you have more resources, more skill, more social capital than at any other point. A nagging dissatisfaction at that precise moment might be evolution's way of pushing you to do something with all of it. To take risks, to push for status, to strike, as Weiss put it, while the iron is hot. The misery is the signal, not a flaw in the system, but the system working exactly as designed. But there's a layer beneath that, and it complicates everything. In 2021, Hannah Kiso and colleagues at the University of Dusseldorf published a large-scale study using brain data from roughly 10,000 middle-aged participants in the UK Biobank. They found that during midlife, the medial prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that manages your sense of self, your social identity, and your ability to understand other people's minds, undergoes significant structural remodeling. Gray matter in this region begins to shrink, and the traits that best predicted the pattern of that shrinkage weren't personality traits or intelligence. They were social traits. Household size, friendship satisfaction, how many people you share your daily life with. Your brain at midlife is literally restructuring itself around the quality of your social world. Now layer that finding over the life of that Hadza man. Laura Carstensen, a psychologist at Stanford, developed what she calls socio-emotional selectivity theory. The idea that as people become more aware of limited time, they prune their social networks. They stop investing in peripheral relationships and pour energy into their closest bonds. This pattern begins not in old age, but in midlife, and it shows up in every culture ever studied. Your ancient ancestor, sitting at a fire 40,000 years ago, was doing the same thing you are doing now in your group chat, quietly deciding who still matters. This is where the story stops being about brain chemistry and starts being about you. The midlife crisis isn't an error. It isn't a breakdown. It's a renovation. Your brain is pruning connections, socially and neurologically, to prepare you for a role your species desperately needed you to play. In hunter-gatherer societies, the elders who survived past their peak physical years became something irreplaceable: living libraries. A 2020 study published in the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health compared perceptions of old age between the Hadza and a matched sample of Polish adults. The Hadza placed the onset of old age at about 54, almost 15 years earlier than the Poles. And when asked what made someone old, Hadza participants didn't talk about weakness. They talked about grandchildren. Old age for them was not a decline. It was a promotion. You had graduated from doing to knowing, from hunting to teaching, from surviving to ensuring that others survive. And this reframes the whole question. You've been thinking of the midlife crisis as a problem to solve, a bump to get over. But what if it's a threshold to cross? What if that sadness at 40, that vague, sourceless sense that something needs to change, is your brain preparing to shift from acquisition mode to transmission mode? From building your own life to making sure the knowledge inside you outlives you. The ancient version of this wasn't buying a red car. It was sitting closer to the children at the fire. It was becoming the person the group couldn't afford to lose. The U-curve of happiness rises on the other side of midlife in every population ever measured. Centenarians in good health report higher well-being than teenagers. That fact should unsettle you. It means the best years are not behind some imaginary peak. It means something in the design of a human life gets better with age once you stop fighting the transition your brain is trying to make. Think about the oldest person you know well. Think about the quality of their attention when they listen to you. There is a patience in that listening that didn't exist when they were 35. That patience is not the absence of ambition. It is the residue of a renovation that happened decades ago, in a quiet season they may not even remember clearly. A season when everything felt slightly wrong and they couldn't explain why, and the world seemed to be asking them a question they didn't have words for. Every human life passes through that same narrow corridor. The walls close in for a while, the lights go strange, and then the corridor opens into a room that is wider and quieter than anything that came before. The oldest fires on Earth are roughly 1 million years old, found deep inside Wonderwork Cave in South Africa. Someone kept those fires burning. Someone taught the next person how. The midlife crisis may be the oldest classroom on Earth. The moment a body stops saying, go, and starts saying, give.